Luffy carries many scars from the battles he's fought over the years, but the deepest among them are the emotional scars from the allies he's lost in battle. But what if he had a chance to avoid all that pain and make amends from the outset? In today's video, we'll be exploring an alternate timeline where Luffy is reborn with his powers and memories. Our story begins at Egghead, where Luffy is escaping with the giant warrior pirates and is chased down by Marcus Mars. In the original timeline, Luffy entered Gear 5, and with Bonnie's help, he managed to defeat Mars and escape the Five Elders. But in this version of events, something goes wrong. Luffy runs out of stamina before Bonnie figures out her transformation, and the two are sitting ducks in the face of Mars's powerful energy beam. Even Emmett can't intervene in time to save Luffy, and the captain of the Straw Hats is finally defeated in battle. But the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika has never been a fruit that lets its chosen user die quietly. The power of the Sun God refuses to accept this ending, and instead of simply fading out, Luffy's consciousness is pulled backward, all the way to the moment on Dawn Island when a 7-year-old boy swallows a rubber devil fruit whole. Luffy wakes up with everything: full mastery of Haki across all 3 types, all the forms of his devil fruit abilities up until Gear 5, and knowledge of every enemy and every betrayal before they even happen. At first he thinks he's just dreaming about the afterlife, but as the days pass he realizes that everything is real. Unlike others who might sit down and carefully map out a master plan, Luffy has one thought: the moment he understands his situation: Ace. Luffy and Ace barely spent any time together after reuniting, and shortly afterward, Ace was executed at Marineford. Luffy knows that he has to save his brother's life using this new opportunity, but he also knows that he can't act too directly. If Luffy tries to convince Ace not to sail or insist on joining his crew, that might change the timeline in a way he can't predict. So Luffy is forced to wait until Marineford, but then he also realizes that Marineford wasn't the problem. The war was just where the problem ended, and the real event to stop it is far earlier. He relives his childhood on Dawn Island with Garp, Dadan, Ace, and Sabo, and he lets all of it play out naturally. But there are moments, especially late at night when Ace is asleep across the room, where Luffy just stares at the ceiling and feels the weight of what he knows. He's watched this person die, but has to act like he doesn't know every second of what's coming. When Luffy finally sets sail at 17, the early arcs go much faster. He already knows when and where he'll find his allies, and he approaches them with the respect that a beloved comrade deserves. Similarly, he uses his foresight to be more direct with villains, but never uses his strength to dominate the early arcs. He still lets Zoro go through with his duel with Mihawk, and lets Usopp face off against Chu in Arlong Park, because he knows that his crew can't go without these challenges. But there's one thing Luffy starts doing differently from the very first island, and it's something no one notices at the time. He starts tracking Marshal D. Teach. Luffy knows the exact sequence of events that lead to Banaro Island. Blackbeard defects from the Whitebeard pirates after murdering Thatch, the 4th Division commander, to steal the Yami Yami no Mi. The fruit Thatch found should have been his by crew law, but Teach kills him for it and flees. Ace, as 2nd Division commander, takes personal responsibility for Blackbeard's betrayal and begins hunting him alone. He chases him all the way to Banaro Island near Water 7, where Blackbeard defeats him and hands him over to the Marines in exchange for a warlord seat. And Luffy knows exactly where in this timeline that murder is going to happen. Luffy crosses paths with Blackbeard after Skypiea, and here's where this version of the story takes its first real divergence. Luffy's crew is not strong enough to take Blackbeard on alone at this point, because remember, he's still a commander of the Whitebeard pirates. But Luffy doesn't need to beat Teach, he just needs to make him understand that there's someone who already knows what he's planning. Luffy sits down across from Marshal D. Teach in a bar, orders meat, and tells him very calmly that he knows about Thatch. He knows about the Yami Yami no Mi, and he knows about the deal with the Marines. Blackbeard can't figure out how this kid knows any of this, and the uncertainty is exactly what Luffy needs. Blackbeard doesn't make his move on Thatch at the usual time, and that delay is just enough time for Luffy to get a message through to Ace, warning Whitebeard that one of his men is planning a betrayal from within. Whitebeard is not a man who ignores warnings about his family, so he quietly puts Thatch under protection, rotating his guard and limiting Blackbeard's access. Teach still makes his attempt because he's not the kind of man who backs down, but this time, he's caught in the act before Thatch dies. Whitebeard intercepting Teach means Ace never needs to hunt him. The Banaro Island fight never happens, and neither the Impel Down breakout nor Marineford occur. But Luffy is smart enough to know this victory is fragile. Blackbeard escapes from the Whitebeard pirate's ship before Whitebeard can finish him, and he still has pieces in play that no one else knows about. He goes underground and starts building toward his goals through different means. Think about it. Teach became one of the 4 emperors through his own effort. There's no way he's being taken down so easily. But at least with Ace alive and the Summit War erased, the story moves forward through the new world differently. The time skip as we know it still happens because he knows better than anyone how far short his crew falls against the world's real threats. But this time, Luffy trains solely with the intention of growing stronger rather than being driven by grief. Luffy trains with Rayleigh to stabilize Gear 5th for extended use. master future sight observation haki to its fullest edge, and learn how to apply Conqueror's haki offensively rather than just as an ambient pressure. When the crew reunites, Ace is alive, and while he doesn't join the Straw Hats as a crewmate, he becomes a constant presence in their coalition. But even with everything going right, this Luffy can't stop every tragedy, and this becomes the clearest on Whole Cake Island. The mission to retrieve Sanji proceeds much the same as it does in the original timeline, but then the escape begins, and Luffy faces a problem he's been dreading. In the original timeline, Pedro is the one who ends up saving everyone when the Thousand Sunny gets trapped by Perospero's candy. It's a heroic death, but it's also a completely avoidable one, and Luffy knows exactly how and when it happens. This time, when Perospero begins raising his candy wall around the Sunny, Luffy is already there. He deals with Katakuri much quicker in this timeline thanks to the additional future sight training with Rayleigh, so Luffy intercepts Perospero easily. Perospero doesn't get to make his candy cage, and Pedro, who has already mentally said his goodbyes, gets to live. And this is where you start to see the real difference between this Luffy and the old one, because earlier, he just protected those in front of him. He was always responding to tragedy instead of preventing it. This Luffy is still driven by the same love, but now he knows which moments matter and where he needs to be to save everyone. Which brings us to Egghead, because in the original timeline, the Straw Hats arrive at the future island almost by accident, drifting in after the chaos of Wano. But in this timeline, Luffy's been thinking of Egghead since Sabaody, because that's when Bartholomew Kuma scattered his entire crew across the world to save them. Kuma gave up everything from his body to his free will so that the world government wouldn't destroy Sorbet Kingdom and Vegapunk could cure Bonnie's Sapphire Scales disease, and the world government took everything he offered and then decided Bonnie was a loose end anyway. He reaches out to Dragon through back channels long before the crew arrives at Egghead, making sure the Revolutionary Army has eyes on Vegapunk and on the CP0 operatives being moved into position. When the Straw Hats arrive at the future island, they land in a situation where Luffy already knows Saturn is coming, and has positioned his allies accordingly. The confrontation with the Five Elders is completely different this time. In the original, Saturn arrives to find a battlefield in progress, but this time, Luffy is standing in the middle of Egghead and Gear 5th, clearly waiting for him. The battle that follows is everything the original Egghead confrontation was, except this time, Luffy isn't playing defense. He doesn't need to protect an escape route because the escape was already organized and Vegapunk's research has already been secured. He fights Saturn purely on offensive terms, using every ounce of Conqueror's haki coding to systematically dismantle the Elder's regenerative advantage. Vegapunk, Bonnie, Kuma, and the Straw Hats manage to escape unscathed before the rest of the Five Elders turn up. But most importantly, Vegapunk's research on the Void Century, Joy Boy, and the true history of the world is all preserved, to be shared on his own terms, rather than broadcast as a dying man's final confession. And it gets even better, because with Vegapunk alive, we have a much better shot at restoring Kuma's mind. It won't be instant, and some of what was taken from Kuma may never fully come back, but Bonnie gets to sit across from her father while he's still recognizably her father. In terms of lives saved, Luffy's rebirth was a total success, but was the journey worth it? Luffy laughed his way through the Grand Line the first time, made every alliance by accident, found every Nakama by bumping into them, and fought every battle purely on instinct. He was genuinely free. But in this timeline, Luffy always knows what's coming and positions himself like a chess piece. Maybe he lost the joy of his journey so far, but the great unknown awaits him as he travels in search of the One Piece. So what did you think? Did this version of Luffy make the right calls, or did knowing too much actually lead to worse decisions? Let me know in the comments down below.